started. So just be patient. It takes a minute. And I have to share it to our Facebook page. Bob, I found out how to make it work.
That's good.
Yes.
I always say
If I do it from YouTube, it works better that way. Because I can't run both of them at the same time. I learned. So
I always save the links because I may want to watch something later, and
yes.
I've actually already done that.
All righty. And we will also hit the record button. Okay. I think we're good to go. Good afternoon, friends. We are here for our final Mental Health Monday conversation due to a grant that we have received from the state to host these conversations. And we have brought in someone who has shared with us before when the pandemic first began. I believe our presenter came and shared with the council in this format about how to take care of our own mental health. And so Dr. Sullivan has called her and she has joined us again. See, I talked him up. He's here. I will. Hey there. So where are you, Dr. Sullivan?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm in the Newark airport.
Okay. So
you're
going to be kind of muted then, right?
You'll be muted. So I'm happy
to
see you all, though. And,
well, welcome back to the good old US of A.
Thank you. Good to be back home from Germany.
All right. We're getting ready to open. I'm going to open with a word of prayer. I'm going to introduce our presenter, and then we will put it in her hands. Let us pray as we gather at this time, God. We remember that in our Christian text, we are told that we must care for the children. We've learned to care for them physically. Today, we learn how to care for their mental health. Grateful for those who have tuned in, grateful for our presenter, grateful for Pastor Jack, who has returned to us from spending a week with the World Council of Churches in Germany. Glad that he is able to tune in with us. As we go through our next hour, open our hearts, our eyes, and our minds to receive what is being shared and presented, that we would take the lead in making sure that we care for our children the way you intend. This we pray in your name. Amen and amen. Our presenter today is Regina Haynes. That's my maiden name, so we've already claimed each other as cousins. We might not be, but we're claiming it anyway. Regina is the Chief Clinical Officer at St. Vincent Family Services in Columbus, Ohio. She has worked in the behavioral health care field for the last 30 years, during which time she has dedicated her career to advocacy and providing services to children and families. Ms. Haynes has provided direct clinical services, facilitated various trainings for parents, teachers, and other professionals, and has been a leader within the professional community, providing her expertise regarding policy, program planning, and service delivery. In her current role, Ms. Haynes is responsible for monitoring and expanding the continuum of services at St. Vincent Family Services, ensuring that trauma-informed care is the foundation of all service provision. She is also committed and values that all services are delivered from a trauma-informed perspective. In addition, Ms. Haynes dedicates her time to assisting community partners in understanding the impact that community trauma has on children and families. Ms. Haynes has dedicated her services to several nonprofit boards and community organizations. In her most recent role, she is a member of the Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Central Ohio chapter. This organization's mission is to advocate on behalf of Black women and girls to promote leadership, development, and gender equity in the areas of health, education, and economic empowerment. Community organization. Something's happening here. It did. So without further ado, we are going to turn it over into the hands of our presenter, Ms. Regina Haynes. Welcome back to the Ohio Council of Churches, and we're anxious to hear what you've got to share.
Well, thank you for having me back. That means that I must have said something meaningful last time. So thank you for allowing me to come back. Are you able to see my screen that has my PowerPoint?
I can see it.
Yes.
All right. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about mental health in children. All of my adult career has been around building up children's mental health, addressing those disparities, those issues associated with the lack of health as it relates to our children's mental health. And as we talk these next 30 minutes, Dr. Jack has given me 30 minutes, he said. So I'm going to do everything I can to stay within those 30 minutes. And hopefully there's an opportunity for us to repeat this topic, because it is a challenge for, if you can only imagine anything happening in 30 minutes. So we will go ahead on. If there is, I'll ask one of you all to monitor the chat for me. That'd be very helpful. I'm going to focus on the presentation. So
I've got that covered.
Thank you. When we think about children's mental health, so we think about, we're looking at it's easy for us to look at health in general. We know physical health. We've focused on physical health for so long. Now we're saying, let's look at how children are doing mentally. What's impacting the well-being of children in our community. We know that children in general in our community are struggling, particularly in the Columbus area. Every single day we turn the news on, there's something happening with children. There is something happening, there's crime being committed. There's children that's drowning, children that's being left unattended. So there's so many mishaps that's happening in our community. We hear of schools, teachers saying we're walking out of the classroom because of the behavior of children. So there's so many factors that we are having to deal with in our community as it relates to children. A lot of those factors tend to stem from those children's mental health. So as we think of mental health, I think I mentioned it probably the last time we were together, but I like to look at health on a continuum. So I like to consider health on one end of a continuum and illness on the other end of the continuum. And any given time, our scale can be tilted. Usually we want to operate in a balance of a good healthiness. There's a good balance of our ability to cope with everything that's going on around us. And then sometimes, depending on what happens, depending on who we are, that scale is tilted over on the illness side. So we'll be talking a little bit about both of those. What does it mean to be mentally well or mentally healthy? And then what does it mean to be mentally ill or having a disorder, especially as it relates to children? So as we go through our time together, we will Hopefully I have the, tell me what you're able to see.
I'm seeing a thing about captions and subtitles.
Okay. Let me stop. Is that,
Okay, share it again.
I am going to.
Somehow you got the captions on with it.
Yeah, I think when we put the share on earlier, we put the sound on.
Right. That shouldn't have done that.
Okay. I'm getting there. Sorry about that. I think I want to take the, I think I want to take the slideshow off.
Okay.
All right. So this should get us back to our screen here. All right. So we'll just go with it from our, are you able to see the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll just spend a few minutes and then we'll define health, what impacts a child or children's mental health, what are some of the symptoms of the disorders that we're going to be talking about, what are some of the common disorders, and then the appropriate interventions that we can use. And then we just look at how prevalent is mental illness in children. So when we think about mental health, children's mental health, we're talking about, again, on that scale between health and illness, we're talking about children that are able to reach those developmental milestones, those emotional milestones, those children that are able to learn healthy social skills and cope. Basically, when life throws them a curveball, they can kind of bounce back from that. And we're talking about children having and living in and with a positive quality of life. And the most important thing we want to look at is being able to function well at home, school, and in the environment. So everything we're talking about today will relate to their ability to function well at home, school, and in the community. So if you think about, is a child moving from health to illness, are they able to function in those main areas of life, home, school, and in the community? That gives you an indicator of how healthy or unhealthy a youngster is. So when we think about what is children's mental disorder, then we looked at what it is, what health is. We said they're able to function in spite of all the things that may come their way. They're able to do well in the domains of life, those areas that they function in, such as school, home, and community, and they're able to meet those milestones within that typical standard based on a scale that we typically go by. So when we look at the disorder, we're looking at any serious changes in their ability to learn, behave, and handle their emotions. We're looking at not the typical fears or occasional fears and worries that happen as a result of responding to life, but we're talking about those things that are serious, persistent, and that interfere with the ability to function within, again, those three main areas that we see children showing up: school, home, and community. So that's what we're talking about. When we talk about disorder, those serious changes in a way a child typically learn, behave, or handle their emotions that really does impact school, home, and community, if there was a way that we looked at summing it up. So the next thing we look at is, well, what impacts a child or children's mental health? And then we look at so many factors, just like adults. It's hard to say what causes a disorder, what causes illness. There's so many factors that cause it. We can't just say one thing. Oftentimes, like physical health, it's hard to say high blood pressure is just diet alone. Sometimes it may be diet. Sometimes it may be stress. Sometimes it may be family history. So if you think of a mental disorder for children, you look at it in the same vein. It's hard to detect or choose one area that can cause it. I always say that we're looking at the whole child, and every aspect of who that child is help to determine how well they're going to function. A child functioning well today could have a mishap or could experience trauma, then it starts to delay their ability or disrupt their ability to function, as we would say, as a typical functioning. So there's an indicator there that oftentimes it is our environmental factors that impact children. Family history, we oftentimes will ask parents, is there any history of mental illness in the family? If there is, then we start to look at what are some of those things that can be genetic, that may be passed on. We start asking family, what was it like prenatally? What kinds of things was happening before the child was even born that may have an impact on who that youngster is now? So there's other factors we think about, community trauma, and we'll go over what some of those traumas could be in our community and or those environmental factors or stressors that impact children's lives and or that shape their ability to function at home, at school, and in the community. So one of the things, I can never talk about mental health or mental illness without talking about trauma. And as we know more now about how trauma impacts us and how trauma tends to stop our typical development, and depending on the age that we experience trauma, will say to us how easy or how likely it is for a youngster and or an adult to bounce back to their normal functioning. And when we say normal, we're talking about the baseline functioning for that youngster and for that adult. So when we think about a childhood trauma, we typically look at St. Vincent's. We tend to see children that come to us with complex trauma, physical and or psychological trauma. And that's what we're talking about. When it gets to the disorder state, it's not something that happened one time usually, unless it can be significant enough to have happened one time and have a lasting effect. But many of our children that we're seeing are dealing with what we call complex trauma. It's multiple events that have happened and or they can be wide range, long term. So it could be something happening more than one time, and it could be something that families have now adjusted to, and it has become a norm for them. And so that's where we come to talk about how complex trauma impacts a child's development and or their functioning. Just to give you some examples of what we're talking about that children experience. And there isn't one that's greater than the other, because just like as with adults, children get a chance to have individual reactions and responses to what happened to them. Nobody can predict that every child will respond the same to every encounter. So we have to just look at, it could be, these are some that are considered traumatic, but there may be some things that are not on this list. So we talk about abuse of any kind tend to have a very significant impact on a child's development. What abuse does and trauma in general, it causes a kid's sense of safety to be disrupted. So anytime you're thinking of trauma, you're talking about safety and security that's being disrupted. And what we do know to help a child function and develop is a child needs safety and security. Children need nurturing. They need to know that they are safe, and the adults in their lives are responsible for keeping them safe. So if you think about our community, how unsafe children may feel in our community, and think about the impact that may have on their functioning. So as we look at this list, again, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. Neglect can be just as profound as the actual touching or contact with the abuse, whether again, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. There's a high number of abuse in our community. When parents are frustrated, agitated, oftentimes we can take it out on children. We see children wearing that. We see children being the ones where they wear the symptoms of the dynamics that's happening with adults and with families. So think about it again in our community when children are experiencing abuse, physical, sexual, and or emotional, and neglect. So think also about witnessing to or participating in violence, domestic violence. Domestic violence is up in our community. When the pandemic hit, remember everybody had to go home. Before, children would be in school, people would be working. When the pandemic first hit, everybody showed up at home, whether they liked working together, close together or not, whether they even had the right equipment to be working from home. It was not a good time for some families. Domestic violence went up in the numbers in some communities. So you can imagine that children are witnessing that and or being a part of that has an impact on their ability to function at home, school, and in the community. If you think about community violence, think about the amount of violence in our community, children witnessing that, hearing about it, participating in it, or reading about it. Anytime that they can get the information that cause them to question their sense of safety. That is what we're talking about when we're looking at how well children's mental health is and or how it's being impacted, how this trauma is impacting them. So when we think about school violence or bullying, that's another traumatic experience that children oftentimes have encountered. You're talking about a sense of safety, security, being pulled away when I'm being bullied. I'm scared. I'm no longer functioning at my highest capacity because my brain isn't able to function at the highest capacity and keep me safe at the same time. So that's a significant impact on children. The pandemic had a significant impact on children. Natural disasters in general, again, as I mentioned, the pandemic caused us all to come in. It caused us to isolate. Children were isolated, where we tend to have them, we encourage social interactions. During the pandemic, we were not able to encourage that. In fact, there is some research that says that our number of mental disorders in children may not have increased during the pandemic because children did not get to the attention of the people who typically will have recognized that they were struggling. And they weren't in school. Some children weren't in school for a whole academic year. So who was able to notice some of those behaviors that wasn't a norm for that youngster, wasn't their baseline? So a lot of that data isn't there to demonstrate that the mental disorders increased or decreased during the pandemic. But we do know that it was significant because some of our children lost family members. They know of family members that they lost during the pandemic. And when we talk about traumatic separations, that can be removal from home and families. It can be the loss of a loved one, anything where there's death, where there's divorce, any time that there is that removal from that significant caregiver or that primary caregiver, that is considered a traumatic encounter for children. So when we think about also these system-induced trauma, so look at the list of things that children can't necessarily control. Parents may not necessarily be able to control it. It's just system-induced trauma. Poverty is a huge indication of trauma. Racial trauma has been significant in our community. Our children, before we can bounce back from one incident to the other, we're having multiple incidents of racial trauma, again, causing their security and safety to be at risk. Food insecurity, housing insecurity, incarceration of a loved one, being separated from a loved one. So look at how prevalent some of these system-induced traumas are, and that should kind of give you an idea of how prevalent some of the mental illness is that our children are experiencing on a daily basis. It's easier for children to bear the symptoms for the family. Many times there are things that's happening in our families, but children oftentimes are the one that's the identified client. They become an easy identified client. It's easy to say that a child is misbehaving, or a child is not following through, or a child is, what we hear a lot of times in our world is our child is being bad. You can ask any child that comes through St. Vincent's and some of our higher levels of care, such as our school and our residential program, and you ask the children, why are you here? And that's almost always they say, because I've been bad. Somebody has given that child the message that they have been bad or they are bad. And many times they get that message, and that message is repeated over and over again. So that's when we talk about some of those environmental factors. Hearing how bad I am, and before you know it, I will start acting that out because that's what's expected of me. So those are the kinds of things that's impacting our children's mental well-being, these childhood traumas. Well, we know that there's a study, I don't know how familiar you are with the ACEs study, but the ACEs study goes further, and not only does it talk about the impact of the trauma on the child's well-being and development, but it also talks about the impact of the physical health later on in adulthood. So they they followed so many children or families and asked about their childhood, and they started listing out the adverse experiences that they had, and they were able to trace that, and the research indicates that there is significant correlation between adult illnesses and childhood trauma. So childhood trauma is very significant. And that is again, the ACEs study. You can Google it. There's a lot of research on it. It is significant. We oftentimes, when we bring children in for treatment, one of the first thing we ask the family is, tell us about your trauma, your history. Tell us about those things that have happened to your child. Oftentimes, we may not use the word trauma, because if I say, tell me the trauma your child has experienced, some families don't relate to that. They see it as my child having experienced life. So if I break it down and say, talk with me about things that your baby may have experienced that could have had a negative feeling for them, that caused them to be scary. What was development like? Has there been a lot of people fighting? Has your child been exposed to violence? Have you had any death in your family? So we ask people to tell us their story so that we can get an idea of the level of traumas that they've experienced. In some of our families, we know that there isn't one trauma that tends to happen and you fully recover. That's not the case in life. In life, things happen, it seems like, for many of us, one after the other. Children are not immune to that. They are part of that same family where the adults are experiencing that. So again, they may get overlooked and thinking that, oh, they'll bounce back, they will recover. But many times we've not given them the tools to bounce back and recover. So when we think about, we think about the childhood trauma and the impact of it. I do have a video. It's like a 3-minute video. I want to see if I can share it. And actually, I'm not sure that I can share it and have the sound on. Let's see. Let me able to hear.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
So that kind of gives you an idea of how we are connecting toxic stress, prolonged exposure to stress, to childhood development. So if you think about what's happening with children, and that gives you an idea of this is why children oftentimes are responding. We see children being angry or children not being able to calm down. That brain has gotten so accustomed to that hyper alertness and responding that they're in that hyper arousal state all the time or most times, and the brain has not been able to fully function or to learn those reasoning skills that they should have learned because of the development that was disrupted as a youngster. So when we think about some of the common childhood mental disorders, we're talking about ADHD. These are some of the very common ones here. Attention deficit. This is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorder in children. Depression is another fairly large one. We're talking about persistent sadness and hopelessness. This is a behavior one, opposition defiant disorder, the acting out that causes serious problems at home and school. This is a big one. This is the one that we see a lot of children coming in for. They're just acting out. Their behavior is out of control, is what we hear parents saying all the time. This is the one that typically schools or teachers will say, I can't teach this child in this setting because of this acting out behavior. And then we have anxiety, fears and worries that interfere with daily functioning. And we're talking also with post-traumatic stress, when severe stress has from an injury or loss of a family member or any type of abuse that a child may have experienced indirectly or directly. But anytime we're talking about mental disorders in children, we're talking about persistent and severe enough to disrupt the functioning in home, school, or community. So those are the things that you have to keep in mind. Is it significant enough that is causing a disruption in their functioning? So just real quick, if you think of, this is a list that we're not going to go through these because I know our time is up, but attention deficit disorder, these are the things that we tend to see when parents bring their children in and we come up with the diagnosis of attention deficit. I heard one parent say, just seems like he's on an automatic machine, just going. and just does not stop, does not pay attention, have a hard time paying attention. But this is the list that we typically will see. When we're talking about depression in children, we typically will see these behaviors or these symptoms, not all the time, but many times. Again, the feeling that sadness, that overwhelming sadness, that hopelessness, being irritable a lot of the time, not necessarily all of the time. I had a youngster, I was at a presentation, and a 16-year-old came up to me after the presentation, and he asked me if he could walk me to my car. And I said, absolutely. And so as he was walking me to the car, he said to me, he said, I go to school, I make A's and B's, I do everything I'm supposed to do at school. But when I get home, I cry myself to sleep every night. So if you're looking for his behavior at school, you would have missed it. But it's so important, and the last slide I'll have is how parents can really try to stay in tune with their children's change in mood, change in behavior, anything that gives you an indication that there's something, we're tilting that scale from mental health to mental illness there. So remember we talked about the opposition defiant disorder up there. And these are the things that we see a lot of children, they're just angry. Children are just angry, losing control, not doing what we ask them to do, or what the adults ask them to do, blaming others for their mistake. This is another one that comes in, we see a lot in treatment centers. Schools, typically, these are the ones that come to their attention because look at this list. They need children to be able to manage their emotions at school. Schools are saying as early as kindergarten and preschool, social emotion development is delayed. Children are coming in not able to manage those basic emotional skills that you typically would see in a child who has somewhat of a balance with their emotions. Anxiety, we do see some anxiety in children. Again, depending on the trauma they've gone through, it could be demonstrated in anxiety, either one of those disorders. And these are just a few of the disorders that we see, but there's several other disorders that can be assigned to children based on how they present. When we look at post-traumatic stress disorder, these are some of the symptoms that we're talking about. Children just becoming upset, repeating or reliving the event over and over again in their dreams, in their thought, and in their play, being helpless or hopeless or withdrawn. Not every kid would demonstrate the same symptoms. They may demonstrate different symptoms. If we're talking about how do we intervene, and what we're doing today is one of the best steps in intervening, is we are looking at and talking about just having the conversation about mental illness and mental health in children and adults. That in itself starts to break down the stigma that's associated with it. It normalizes the language. It normalizes us checking in on children to make sure they're okay. So that's the first thing we could do, building protective factors, making sure that we're putting a sense of safety and security in children so that they can develop and function, building those positive relationships, give children opportunities to achieve. Parents, I always ask parents, what signs are you noticing? You'll know many times before anyone else, because you start seeing they're not eating. Look for those eating and sleeping signs. Look for those signs of withdrawing from other people, those social signs. Are they wanting to be around people less? Are they wanting to be around people more? It will vary based on children. So it's so important that parents watch for those signs, talk to the teacher, be a part of the team when it comes to those professionals, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a pediatrician, and whether it's a referral source that you've been given from the school, such as a mental health treatment center. and or for counseling. There are so many modalities that can be used to support children. But the most important thing is early identification. As soon as with any illness, the sooner we can recognize it and start the treatment, is the more likely the child will recover. Just to give you a couple of statistics around the data around children's mental health, we know how prevalent it is. We know that 1 in 5 children will have a serious mental illness from ages 13 to 18. And then for the younger children, it's even more, it's even 1 to 6. We know that 10 years is the average delay from when the onset of the symptoms until them getting interventions in place. That's a huge delay. Symptoms have been noted, maybe even ignored, or maybe trying things that really weren't even appropriate, which is why we are trying to educate our partners in the community, churches, help us partner with these agencies so that we can identify what some of these symptoms are and get the right treatment in place. 37% of the children with mental health conditions drop out of school, age 14 and above. And then this is the number of children that have some of the diagnoses that we listed above. And then one of the things that's come to our attention recently is the increase in suicide. Children are crying out and are attempting or threatening suicide. So that's something that we have to be mindful of as we navigate through this mental health continuum for children. I know that was a quick, I felt rushed, so please, I will allow you to ask any questions that you may have at this time.
I've got a question to kind of kick it off. As faith providers or as faith professionals, how do we lovingly, caringly, without judgment, approach parents to change that the child is not bad, but that the child is dealing with some kind of trauma in their lives, and a professional referral might be the best thing? How do we do that without, again, my main concern is not trying to have parents feel that we are possibly judging their parenting by saying that your child may need more help than whooping and grounding and those other things can do.
Yeah, so it will be definitely something that you have to handle with care, right? Because nobody wants to hear, most of us don't want to hear initially that we've been not the best parent, because we start to take it personal. Most parents start taking it personal. What did I do wrong? We start questioning ourselves. And many times it has nothing to do with us. So as much as we can educate our congregations, our parents, and not necessarily even start pinpointing certain people, let's talk about what is mental illness in general. Let professionals come to the congregation and talk. Have these mental health wellness days. When we have wellness events at our church, include mental well-being. If we're having physical well-being, let it become a norm in our conversations, so that when we have other folks that can start showing videos about children functioning and all those things, then we can say, because 9 times out of 10, a parent will have recognized it. I may be in denial, but if we have that relationship with a parent, if we have a relationship with the teacher, sometimes the teacher can give them that feedback. Sometimes it's the pediatrician. So we at St. Vincent's, I go to churches and talk. we talk to pediatricians, we talk everywhere that we know our children are encountering adults so that we can get that message and normalize it. If we break the stigma from it for parents, it may be easier for them. It is something that you have to, again, handle with care, though, because people don't want you to feel judged, don't want to feel judged. But I think it's the relationship, it's whoever have the best relationship. If you have a relationship with someone, they are more likely to believe that you care about them.
Hey, anyone else have, there is a request, Regina, that if you would, if it's okay, if you would like to email your PowerPoint to us and we can share it with the participants.
Thank you. Sure.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Jack, certainly. We can certainly talk about a part 2. If there are not any more questions, I look forward to our opportunity to connect with you again. There's a lot more information that we can share as it relates to children. I really would like to break it down further to talk about things that we can do. How do we, from congregation to congregation, how can we talk about it? What can we do within our congregation? I have a t-shirt that says you can have Jesus and a therapist too. So I wear my t-shirt when I go to churches. Let me wear my t-shirt. You can have Jesus and therapy.
And a therapist, yes.
We've got to break the stigma. It's about breaking that stigma. I think that's where it will start. It would be comfortable for us to just have, hey, let's talk about mental illness. Let's talk before we could even use that word in our family. We could even talk about it. We had so many secrets we had to keep. Now we're saying we've got to bring those secrets out. We've got to expose that stuff because our body is keeping record of that. And our children, they're carrying the symptoms for us. Thank you guys for your time.
Well, no, I got another question. Okay. I got another question. What is there a percentage or anything documented of the ACEs that may come from bullying? Especially in light of seeing that a lot of our younger children who are committing suicide have done so primarily because of being bullied by their peers and having no place to turn. How much?
So there's a mound of research on bullying. I'm not familiar with the research on the ACEs and bullying, because the ACEs has prescribed questions that were developed years ago, right? So at that time, when that study was created, it didn't focus on bullying. But there is a lot of research now that says to us bullying has a significant impact on a child's well-being, such to the point that it's considered traumatic and it is considered a childhood trauma. And it's complex because more than likely that bullying didn't happen one time. It was a repeated offense. So that's what makes it complex for our children. And bullying is not just from children to children. Bullying can be in our home when we're threatening children, or they're witnessing our parents fighting, threatening each other. So all those things in a kid's mind can be interpreted as bullying.
Yes. And bullies are usually bullied themselves.
Bullies oftentimes have been bullied, and we can talk about how children learn from their environment, right? Just like, and I know that my time is really up, and I want to be mindful.
Oh, you got 7 minutes. You're good.
Okay, but when we talk about children, it's hard for me to separate children from adults, right? Because children are little people. They're impacted by the same things adults are impacted by it, and in some cases, I would say at a higher rate. because oftentimes their brains have not been developed enough to make meaning out of it like adults. So if you say something to me, I'm going to process it with you. I'm going to talk with you about it. I'm going to try to tease out your intent. Children oftentimes brain have not developed enough to get to that reasoning state. And that's what that video was saying. I was traumatized at this age where I should be able to reason. It's not happening now. So we have to even look at how we are training up children in our homes, how we're intervening at church. What message are we giving them? Are we giving children messages of hope? Do parents leave church with messages of hope for themselves? Because if I'm hopeful, there's a good chance I'm going to translate that hope to my children. But if I'm feeling hopeless, there's a good chance I'm also carrying that, and my children will pick up on it. Even if I never say the word, they will pick up on my energy or my vibe.
All righty. Any other questions? All righty. Safe travels on your way to Cleveland, Dr. Jack.
I did most of my work in schools, and you ran into many, many parents who physically and emotionally abused their children because that's the way they had been raised. And they often, when you tried to counsel them or something, they would say that if they grew up in the church that said, spare the rod and spoil the child. And I'm wondering if there isn't something that ministers can do when they're not directly intervening with a family, but to help a whole congregation understand that that has terrible side effects when a child grows up like that. And I say that as a kid whose dad never paddled us. He beat the hell out of us. And so I lived with it for a while, and I did go crazy, as Jack will affirm. But I also worked hard to see that school people could no longer physically abuse the children either, and you ran into that in every school. There were always 3 or 4 people who would say, well, my dad paddled me a lot and I look where I am. And then my usual response is, yeah, look where you am. But anyway, I won't deliver my sermon. I just wonder if you'd recommend what a church can do to help move us forward in these very destructive things that happened to.
It's interesting because I don't know when you were in school, but that mindset is still prevalent, right? That mindset is almost everywhere. So we always go back to how we were raised. And that's in fact true. We parent how we were parented. And it's a mind shift that has to happen. The more we can educate people, the more we can show them, look at what the research is saying. It's not an easy task to get people to change their mind, but it is a paradigm shift. I've been working with schools and some people will buy it, some people won't buy it, but we have to start small. We start with empowering our churches, start empowering parents. I refuse to let you talk down to my child if I'm a parent and I'm going to the school. This is what I embrace. Every voice has to be saying the same thing when we talk about changing that paradigm shift. Not what's wrong with you, because we put the burden on children then. But what we're saying to parents and to everyone, look at what has happened to that child. Ask that child what has happened to them. So when you ask, what can we do as a congregation? Again, it's the same thing, is have these conversations with our congregation. It starts one family at a time, one church at a time. How do we break this? How do we, again, dispel this myth that it's okay to beat children? Clearly, if just beating them worked, we wouldn't be in the trouble that we're in now, right? If beating them, if cussing them out worked, it wouldn't be a problem. If threatening them worked, they wouldn't be suspended. It's not working. So we have to do something different. A lot of us believe in threatening kids, being punitive. I want to punish the kid. That is the adult need being taken care of. That's me getting my anger out. I feel like I got to do something because I'm so angry. We have to come to a resolve and say, it's not working. It controlled us in front of our parents, right? That's external control. It didn't do anything, though, for my internal control. I grew up in a similar setting where my parents didn't tolerate this behavior. And my dad was the one, he would just he would really beat my brothers. My brothers, we didn't act out in front of them. But as soon as my brothers got to school, guess what? They acted out because it was external control. And that's what we want to work with parents on. How do we change the narrative? But we have to all do it. It has to be at school. It has to be in churches. It has to be everywhere.
Yeah, I have one other question. As the grandfather of a granddaughter who is now 22 years old, and she's been suicidal since she was 11 years old. And I know that my daughter and her husband have undergone a tremendous amount of expense, and they still don't see a whole lot of improvement. But my question has to do with where can a mother, single mother or single father living on minimum wage, where can that person go to get help in Colorado or Ohio?
So in, there are resources around, and most of the agencies have what we call a sliding fee scale. So if Medicaid is not an option, then we typically will be able to look at what your income is and then determine a fee. In some cases, we can go to our local boards and say, hey, is there a safety net? Is there any money that can help families get the resources that they need? NAMI Franklin County has been working with churches saying, we want to reduce the barriers to getting help. We will help you. We will help find some of the costs that's associated with treatment. And we've been working to get some of those things addressed at the Franklin County level. It varies based on counties. It is a challenge. Insurance, healthcare is a challenge in general, but there are some agencies that will allow services on a sliding fee scale. And I don't know what county you're in, so it does vary by county. There are some resources. There are some resources available. We just have to be really creative. There are some schools that have counselors in schools. There are some churches that are bringing counselors in. They may have counselors within their congregation. So we're looking to see where can we put the services so people can have quicker access to it.
Well, I taught at the university for 30-some years, but I would say that both teachers and counselors could use a lot better training to deal with this kind of problem. And they're not likely to get it, is my experience. But I want to thank St. Vincent for the service that I know it has provided over the years, not only for this type of thing, but for sustenance and support that's excellent. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. Absolutely. And that's what it's going to take. There is not going to be a one-stop shop for everything, but we are going to have to expand our scope to look at what else can we provide families. Families want all of their needs met. They want their basic needs met. We can't talk about mental health until we talk about a place to live. Where are we going to sleep tonight? There are just some basic needs that just have to be met before we can even talk about it. That's where poverty comes in. If a person is living in poverty and not getting their basic needs met, that's traumatic in itself. There's no safety there when you have to wonder where your next meal is coming from. So that's what I mean about just a total approach to care. I know in this community, there's the food bank, there's so many efforts being put in place to make sure that children and families have access to some of their basic needs. It's not enough, you're right. No matter what we do, the need is so great. There's no one agency that can handle all the needs, but together we can start putting a dent in it. The biggest thing for us is reducing this stigma, this negative image or this negative connotation that's associated with being mentally ill.
All righty. We're kind of over time, but we do have one last question. Dr. Jack wanted to know before he left, if you could say really quickly, what promotes great mental health in children?
So the first thing we would do, and I think I mentioned it on that one slide, building protective factors for children. The opposite of the things that harm children, do the opposite of that. So if children feeling unsafe, create a safe environment for children. Make sure children have their basic needs met. Make sure that schools are ready to receive children. Make sure that children aren't just tolerated, but that they can be celebrated, that people see potential in every child. Every kid, regardless of who they are, want to feel like they're being respected and being received. Nobody wants to be isolated and alone. Those are the kinds of things that we can start doing. Creating avenues for children to be successful. Things that create, like the sports. A lot of children, sports are great. Not only the sports, but the arts, activities that they can be a part of that create an opportunity for them to experience some success and feel like they're achieving something. But the most important thing that children need are strong relationships with people that can protect them, keep them safe from the bad things that's happening in our community. That's what they need most. They need a village wrapped around them. Parents can't do it all. Schools have to be a part of it because that's where the kids are for 6 and 7 hours a day. You have to be a part of it. You have to change how you're interacting with children. There are some folk who just want to be indifferent to children. They're a struggle to embrace. Don't get me wrong. Some of the children are hard to embrace. But if we want to build that mental health in those children, we have to be willing to suspend judgment and embrace every kid. Every kid deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Every children deserve to grow up in an environment where there's safety and security. That's when we are starting to talk about how do I build your a child's well-being? What protective factors can we put in place? Can we teach our children? Don't supervise your children, right? Don't let any and everybody supervise your children. Your children don't spend the night over here. Changing the narrative of just letting our children go anywhere. Children need supervision. Children need structure. Those are protective factors that we can put in place to help keep our children safe.
All righty. Thank you, Cousin Regina.
Thank you,
for
cousin.
sharing with us. And we are going to bring her back to continue this conversation because there's so much and it is so rich. We might be able to extend it and maybe bring you next month. Dr. Jack and I will talk about it. On the 4th Monday of this month will be our Faith Leaders Call. That will start at 3:30 p.m. I'm not sure who our presenter is going to be yet, but as soon as Dr. Jack gets back and gets some rest, we will get the information out. We also want to share with you that on Sunday, October the 9th, the Ohio Council of Churches will be observing its Anti-Racism Sunday. our co-chair of anti-racism team, Brother Bill Wason, who is on the call with us today. What we're going to do, we've got a nice little program planned.
Yes.
And Ms. Reed Kendall, could you please mute yourself?
Hold on a minute.
All right. And at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be on the council's Facebook page, sharing our anti-racism worship service. Our keynote speaker is one of the art team members, the Reverend Dr. Renee Warmack Heels. Information will be going out starting this week, so please tune in. And we'll also have some resources available to send out that in our congregations and communities, we may begin the work and conversation of ending racism in our country. Brother Rosenberger, I'm going to ask if you would pray our closing prayer for us.
Let's join together. Gracious Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to be together in this gathering, to reflect on the needs of our children, the struggles that they face, the untold burdens that many of them carry. We thank you for all those who are working to resolve these problems and bring hope and care. Grant continued guidance that our children may grow in hope, in faith, as you would have them be. And together we praise you in the name of Jesus, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week and a great month. And we'll be seeing, and yeah, you'll have a little bit more time the next time. Miss Regina?
Dr. McIntosh,
Yes.
this is Dee Malone with Adam H. I don't want to belabor the meeting, so I'll just ask if you could give me your email address in the chat, and then I'm going to send you some information about what we're doing in a couple of weeks. I think it would be beneficial to members.
All right, I'm going to put it right here, right now.
Thank you. And I'll send it over this afternoon. Thank you.
All right. All right. So you got it? All right. Everyone have a great day.